Chapter 24. The same subject continued. The rest of the 31st chapter of the Proverbs is explained. No quality of a valiant woman could be wanting in our Queen, for she was the fountain of virtue and of grace. Our text continues in the 16th verse. She hath considered a field and bought it. With the fruits of her hand she hath planted a vineyard. The field of highest perfection, where the abundant and fragrant fruits of virtue are reared, was the one which most Holy Mary considered, and as she was inspecting and taxing it by the clearness of the divine light, she recognized the treasure which was buried in it. In order to buy this field, she exchanged for it her property rights in all the earth, of which she was truly the queen and mistress, preferring the possession of this field to all other things, and abdicating in favor of it the use and right of all her possessions. This mistress alone could dispose of all creation, for she alone had the full possession of it, and she alone could buy the whole field of holiness. She alone could examine and estimate its full value, and she alone, next to God, appropriated to herself the field of the divinity and its attributes, while the other saints could appropriate only a part. With the fruits of her hands she hath planted a vineyard. She planted the Holy Church, not only by giving us her most holy Son to form and constitute it, but by being herself his coadjutrix, and after his ascension, remaining the mistress of the Church, as will be related in the third part of this history. She planted the vineyard of the paradise which that fierce beast Lucifer had ruined and devastated, thus restoring it to fruitfulness by her solicitude. She planted the vineyard of her most great and magnanimous heart, setting in it the sprouts of virtue and the most fertile vines, from which Christ, in the winepress of the cross, distilled the most sweet wine of his love to inebriate his beloved and nourish his friends. She hath girdled her loins with strength, and hath strengthened her arm. The greatest strength of those who call themselves strong is in their arm, with which they perform hard and difficult works. And the most difficult work of earthly men consists in restricting their passions and inclinations and subjecting them to reason. Therefore the holy text says of this valiant woman that she both girds her loins and strengthens her arm. Our queen was subject to no passions or disorderly inclinations, which she would have to suppress in her most innocent person. But this did not hinder her from being more courageous in restricting herself than all the children of Adam, whose interior is thrown into disorder by the consequences of sin. Without having need thereof, her virtues and her love urged her to practice greater mortification than the most wicked inclinations could ever have required. None of those who were infected by sin and who were bound to satisfy for it ever exerted such strength in mortifying their disorderly passions as our Princess Mary exerted in governing and mortifying more and more all her faculties and senses. She chastised her most innocent and virginal body by incessant penances, watchings, fastings, prostrations in the form of the cross, as we shall say later on. She denied to her senses all rest and indulgence, not because they were in disorder, but so as continually to perform what was most holy and acceptable before God, being never weak, never remiss or negligent in bringing all her works to the full measure and efficacy of grace. She hath tasted and seen that her traffic is good. Her lamp shall not be put out in the night. The Lord is so kind and faithful with creatures that, when he commands us to gird ourselves with mortification and penance, since the kingdom of heaven suffers violence and must be gained by force, on account of this violence to our inclinations, he rewards our efforts with a joy and consolation that fill our heart with delight. By this joy we know how good is this exchange of the highest good for those works of mortification by which we restrain our hankering after temporal pleasure. For as a prepayment we receive the joys of the Christian truth, and in it a pledge of eternal life. And the more we engage in this kind of commerce, the more we will gain, and the greater will be our esteem for this commerce. If we, who are subject to sin, experience this truth, how much more intimately did Most Holy Mary understand and appreciate it? And if in us, in whom the night of sin is so dense and persistent, the divine light of grace can be preserved by means of penance and mortification of our passions, how must this light have burned in the heart of that most pure creature? She was not oppressed by the infection of our gross and corrupted nature. She had not been scorched by the tinder of disobedience. She was not stung by the reproaches of a bad conscience, nor by the fear of actual sin. And besides all this, she was enlightened beyond all conception of angels or men. She understood well and enjoyed this kind of commerce without extinguishing, in the troubles and dangers of this life, the light-giving lamp of the Lamb.